I was 34 when my mother told me I didn't belong at our family's table anymore. She didn't use those exact words, she never did, but she had a way of arranging a sentence like a bouquet of thorns, and every petal drew blood. It happened the morning of my father's retirement gala, a charity banquet at the Halcyon Country Club that my parents had bragged about for months. The invitation said, black tie. My mother's text said something else. Sweetheart, tickets are quite expensive. We don't want you to feel uncomfortable. I read it twice the way you read a diagnosis, as if repetition might rearrange fate. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter, watched sunlight wash over the marble my own hands had chosen, and reminded myself to breathe as if I were teaching my lungs for the first time. I'm Ava. I build things people stay in and talk about afterward. Subtle places with long corridors of light. Quiet rooms where tired hearts remember how to rest. I never called it hospitality. To me, it felt like something closer to sheltering, like cupping your palms around a candle in wind. 14 years ago, I left home with a suitcase and a stranger's courage, promising myself I wouldn't come back until I could bring something of worth, something indisputable. I used to believe worth was the language my family spoke. Later I learned their dialect was different. It was performance applause names that impressed rooms. Mine was effort. Theirs was image. That difference was how the fracture began. After the text, I called my younger sister. Lila always answered with a laugh that sounded like clinking glasses. Don't be sore, she said. The tickets are insane and they made me buy two. I can't carry you tonight. Maybe next time. Carry me. As if I hadn't been carrying myself for years across cities and sleep-deprived months and bank meetings that smelled like other people's fear. She told me she had a couture gown coming in silk emerald backless. You should see the Halcyon's ballroom, she said, thrilled. 1,000 tiny lights like stars. It's Dad's kind of heaven. The board members from Meridian Bank will be there. Don't worry, I'll represent us. Us as if we were a duet. The line went soft. I said I was happy for Dad. Lila said of course I was. Then silence, kind and sharp as her smile, and the call ended. I could have left it alone. I could have spent the night on my balcony, the city unspooling below me like ribbon, watching planes blink their careful path across the dark. Instead, something old and stubborn in me refused to be exiled by a price tag delivered as pity. I pressed my palm flat on the kitchen island, felt the cold seam beneath my skin, and heard my father's voice from another lifetime. We run numbers, not dreams, Ava. He'd said it when I told him I was leaving the accounting firm to manage a boutique guest house 2 states away. I don't want your life, I had replied, 20 years old and trembling. He had looked at me like I had told him I didn't want my name. That afternoon I pulled a garment bag from the back of my wardrobe and unzipped it with the reverence you reserve for letters from the dead. The dress was simple, precise, and quiet, a midnight sheath with a neckline like the horizon. I'd bought it 5 years ago in a month, when payroll worried me more than birthdays, and yet I'd handed over my card because sometimes you need to clothe your future before it arrives. I swept my hair into something that looked like intention slipped into heels, that taught me to slow down, and left my apartment as dusk lit the buildings in honey. The Halcyon sits on a hill that pretends to be a mountain overlooking a city that pretends to be kinder than it is. Its drive is a curve of cobblestone meant to make tires whisper. As my car rolled to a stop beneath the portico, a valet opened my door with a practiced warmth that had nothing to do with me. I thanked him. He tagged my keys and smiled like he'd been told to, and for a heartbeat I felt like a teenager in a borrowed dress again, desperate to pass. Then I stood, squared my shoulders, and the memory put itself away. Inside, the lobby opened like a throat clearing to speak. Marble brass, a chandelier that looked like rain remembered. People gathered in soft clots of laughter and cologne, the air heavy with the perfume of money that has convinced itself its grace. I saw my mother before she saw me. She inhabited the room like a queen who suspects the kingdom is rented. The emerald of Lila's dress was a spotlight, her hair an advertisement for good decisions and better genetics. My father stood between them, perfected by pride. When they turned and their eyes found me, I watched a dozen rehearsed expressions flick across my mother's face and settle on the one she wore when she chose kindness for witnesses. "Ava, darling," she said, and kissed the air near my cheek. "You look unexpected." My father's smile stuttered and recovered. "We weren't sure you'd make it," he said, "which meant we hadn't wanted you to." Lila's gaze swept my dress like a customs agent. "Oh," she said, light as lace. "You did come." "Just to sit in the back and clap," I replied. I told myself to be small, to be harmless. The room glittered, and all I wanted was to vanish into one safe corner and remember how to love these people without asking them to love me correctly in return. We moved into the ballroom, which wasn't a room so much as a promise someone had managed to keep. Candles nodding in crystal. Waiters like ideas of waiters. A string quartet attempting not to belong to any single era. At our table place, cards drew neat borders around intimacy. My name wasn't among them. I found it 3 tables away, beside people who wore their names like armor, a consultant, a philanthropist, a surgeon who made sentences sound sterile. My mother apologized with her fingertips on my forearm. "The head table is reserved for board and family," she murmured. "You understand." I understood that the word family had an asterisk, and I lived beneath it. During the salad, the kind that pretends to be food, while being essentially opinion, the president of Meridian Bank rose to toast my father, 38 years of service, a steward of values, a guardian of prudence. The words stacked themselves like bricks until I could feel the weight of a house I once tried to live in. People clapped. My father's eyes shone. I loved him, then I did. Love is strange that way. It arrives when you least want to admit it and refuses to be argued with. He stood to respond and spoke about stability, about the virtue of knowing where every dollar sleeps, about how families are built on trust and ledgers balanced with care. Lila touched his sleeve with a perfectly timed daughter's pride. My mother tilted her chin like a seal of approval stamped in bone. The main course reminded me of my first year away, knives behaving like questions meat that tasted like someone else's decision. The conversation at my exile table drifted toward the weather of markets and the scandal of taxes and whether philanthropy should be seen or simply effective. I nodded at all the right moments and thought about sheets turned down in quiet rooms by hands that never get mentioned in speeches. I thought about the first time I knew a guest had slept without nightmares because the lamp in the corner produced the exact shade of dawn they needed. No one at my table would understand why that felt like arithmetic solved. During dessert, my mother sent a message through a waiter. "We need to talk. Come." I excused myself and followed the waiter to the corridor behind the ballroom where portraits of men with small smiles watched me pass. My mother stood near the powder room doors, the emerald of Lila's dress orbiting like a satellite at her side. "Ava," she said, and her voice wore its best pearls. "Don't be upset. The table placements were complicated. You understand." "I do," I said, and I did more than she knew. She inhaled, measured, and continued. "We're meeting the bank's board after the program. They're discussing partnerships. Lila will represent the family." The implication slipped its glove off. "You don't need to linger, darling. It's late and, well, the tickets. We don't want you to strain yourself." I felt the world tilt a soft slide as if gravity had remembered me. The old fury, raw, adolescent, clumsy rose and receded. In its place, something older stood up. I could feel my own spine like a line on a map. "Mom," I asked softly, "what do you think I do all day?" Her eyes flickered the way light does when it hits a mirror and doesn't know where to go. "You manage a hotel, several perhaps, and you're very good at the decorative touches. We're proud you have a hobby." A hobby. 14 years of dawns. Payroll paid with breath held. Contractors who call you kid until they need a decision and then call you boss with a tremor in their voices. A hobby. Lila's hand found my elbow gentle. "Ava, tonight is Dad's night. Let's not make it about you." Her skin smelled like lilies and certainty. I swallowed, felt it burn. "I'm not here to make anything," I said. "I'm here to sit, clap, and leave quietly." My mother exhaled the relief of a problem contained. "Good girl," she whispered, and the phrase slid under my ribs cold and sudden. Back in the ballroom, the auction began vacations that sounded like myths, art that had more provenance than personality. A puppy that made everyone perform tenderness. Numbers rose like obedient sons. My mother bid on a vineyard tour and won applause. My father shook hands as if he'd invented generosity. I watched them and remembered the night my first property almost collapsed under a roof that wasn't code. I'd stood with a contractor at midnight rain entering the building like a rumor, and I'd signed papers that would keep my workers paid even if I wasn't. By the time the final check was announced, obscene and holy, my throat felt covered in velvet. The master of ceremonies thanked the sponsors, and the Halcyon's general manager took the microphone to praise the donors, who never asked for praise. The list unfurled like silk corporations disguised as people legacies, disguised as love. He paused, smiled, and said, "And to the anonymous patron whose support quietly ensured tonight's success on behalf of the Halcyon, thank you." My mother squeezed my father's hand. "It has to be the Andersons," she whispered. Lila whispered a different name, the one trending in town. I closed my eyes, a small surrender to the ache of how image deafens. For a moment the ballroom felt underwater. I saw strangers clap for a ghost they could not name and thought about all the ways a person can exist without being seen. After midnight, the board reception gathered in a side salon where paintings of harbors pretended rescue. My mother tried to shepherd me toward the lobby with the compassion she sets aside for people she pities. "You've been brave," she said, as if I'd attended an appointment rather than a life. I should have left. I should have given them the gift of my absence. Instead, I found myself smoothing my dress, touching the bracelet my grandmother had given me when I was 16, and still believed approval was shaped like a nod, and I said very softly, "I think I'll stay a little longer." My mother's smile froze at the edges. Lila's brow creased the way it did when a waiter asked a question she hadn't prepared to answer. My father, ever the diplomat, patted my shoulder without touching it, and nodded toward the doors where men in tailored patience waited to shake hands with a version of him none of us took home. You would think the universe enjoys playing witness at the precise moment a story takes its first reckless breath. A door opened, a figure stepped through, and a strange quiet collected like dust in sunlight. The Halcyon's owner had arrived. Someone whispered. I felt the air change, curiosity slicking into calculation. My mother stood taller. Lila practiced her greeting in a breath. And in that fragile second before names were spoken and roles assigned, I realized I no longer feared the room. It could not unmake me. Not tonight. He stepped into the light like someone the room had been waiting for. The whispers swelled, then hushed. Even the music seemed to lean toward him. The Halcyon's general manager moved quickly to his side, nervous pride radiating from his posture. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "please welcome the benefactor who made tonight's restoration project possible, Ms. Ava Rowan, founder and CEO of the Rowan Group." For a second, the name didn't feel like mine. It sounded like a story told about someone else. My mother's smile broke in half. Lila's hand slipped from her wineglass. My father's mouth formed the beginnings of a word that never arrived. The applause that followed was polite, uncertain, the sound people make when they suspect they've missed something important. I stepped forward anyway, letting the light find me. The same light that had ignored me all night. "Good evening," I said. "Thank you for supporting the Halcyon. This hotel has been part of my heart for years. Tonight's event, this ballroom, this restoration, this entire evening isn't just hosted here. It's home. My home." A ripple moved through the crowd, soft gasps, then a scattered realization. I looked at my father. He had gone completely still, like a man watching a dream he didn't authorize. "Dad," I said quietly enough that only the front tables heard, "you always told me to invest in stability. I just chose to build it." The general manager handed me a glass of champagne. I lifted it and my reflection flickered in the golden surface like something newly born. "To the people who told us not to risk everything. Thank you," I said, my voice steady now. "You taught us to build what we were denied." For a moment no one moved. Then applause, real, startled, unstoppable, rolled through the hall. I caught sight of Lila's face. Her practiced serenity had shattered into disbelief. My mother's fingers, jeweled and trembling, dug into the tablecloth. I almost felt sorry for them, almost. I returned to my seat, my true seat at the head of the table the hotel staff had quietly reserved without being asked. My assistant approached with a folder. "The board's waiting upstairs when you're ready," she whispered. I nodded. Upstairs, a glass-walled conference suite overlooked the ballroom like a cathedral balcony. When I entered, the men from Meridian Bank were already on their feet. Ms. Rowan once said quickly, "Your timing is impeccable. We've been eager to discuss the acquisition proposal you mentioned." "Yes," I said. "Meridian has always been part of my father's legacy. I thought it fitting to keep it in the family one way or another." My voice didn't tremble. The papers were signed before dessert was cleared downstairs. When I returned, my parents were waiting by the door, the crowd thinning behind them. My father's pride had drained into bewildered silence. My mother reached out, fingers brushing my sleeve. "Ava," she whispered, "why didn't you tell us?" I looked at her, at the woman who had spent a lifetime mistaking distance for elegance. "Because you never listened when I wasn't speaking your language," I said. "I needed you to see me not as a daughter who failed your idea of success, but as a woman who built her own." Lila stepped forward, desperate and small for the first time in her life. "You could have warned us," she said, her voice cracking. "I did," I said softly. "Every time I asked you to believe in me." Their driver brought the car around. I watched their silhouettes vanish through the glass doors, absorbed by the night like spilled ink. When I finally left the ballroom, the lights were dimmed, the echo of music haunting the marble. The chandelier above me caught my reflection in 1,000 fragments. For the first time, I saw myself clearly, not as a daughter defined by absence, but as a woman who had turned silence into an empire. Outside, the air smelled like the beginning of rain. My heels clicked against the stone like punctuation marks at the end of a long chapter. I thought of my father's toast earlier that night about balance sheets and legacies. He'd been right about one thing: every account must close eventually. You just decide whether it ends in deficit or in light. At my car, I turned back once. The halcyon shimmered under the storm clouds, steady and alive, mine in every way that mattered. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. The rain started as a hush, a delicate sound against the marble steps, like the city exhaling after holding its breath for too long. I stood beneath the archway of the halcyon, watching it blur the reflections of the departing cars. Inside, the last guests were leaving with their champagne smiles, still murmuring my name as if tasting it might explain me. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just let the rain fall and listened to the quiet that followed my own choices. It's strange how silence can feel like applause when it finally belongs to you. I had spent years chasing that sound, the absence of shame, the end of justification. And now that I had it, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt peaceful. Not the brittle peace of avoidance, but the grounded calm of someone who has already walked through fire and knows where every burn came from. I took off my heels and walked barefoot across the slick pavement toward my car. Each step felt like a confession. The valet tried to rush over with an umbrella, but I waved him off with a smile. "It's fine," I said. "It's just rain." He hesitated, looking at me with the polite confusion of someone who's beginning to suspect they're witnessing the end of something important. He didn't know that for me, this wasn't the end. It was the first night I had nothing left to prove. The drive back to my apartment was quiet. The city was silver with reflection skyscrapers leaning into their own ghosts on the wet asphalt. I passed streets I used to walk with nothing but a notebook and a list of dreams people told me were ridiculous hotels for healing buildings designed to make strangers feel safe. "You'll go broke," my father had said once, shaking his head over the dinner table. "Emotion doesn't pay rent." He was wrong. Emotion builds worlds. When I reached my building, one of mine, though my parents didn't know that either, the doorman greeted me with a soft, familiar respect. "Welcome home, Ms. Rowan," he said. Home. Such a small word for something that took me years to understand. I rode the elevator up to the penthouse, watching my reflection in the glass. For the first time, I didn't see the daughter they'd dismissed or the girl who had begged for validation. I saw a woman who had built her life from the shards of rejection and somehow turned the pain into architecture. The lights of the city stretched beneath me like a living map. I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window, the glass cold against my hand. Somewhere in another part of town, my parents were probably sitting in silence, replaying the night like a story that didn't make sense. My father would be staring at his hands, realizing too late that I had inherited his discipline, but not his obedience. My mother would be trying to rewrite the memory, already deciding what to tell her friends. We always knew she was capable, of course, but none of it mattered anymore. Because tonight, for the first time, I didn't want their approval. I wanted my freedom, and I had it. I thought about Lila, her emerald dress shimmering under the ballroom lights. For years, she'd been the one my parents paraded the success story, the beautiful daughter, the mirror that reflected their pride. I'd envied her ease, her belonging. But ease is fragile. It's built on borrowed air. Now the balance had shifted. She would spend weeks trying to convince herself I hadn't meant to humiliate her. She'd call eventually, not to apologize, but to explain, to remind me that we were still family. And when she did, I would listen kindly. Because the truth was, I didn't hate her. She was just playing the role she'd been cast in. We all were. Until I stopped reading from their script. I walked over to my desk, a sleek slab of walnut overlooking the skyline, and pulled out a folder labeled Halcyon Restoration Phase 2. Inside were blueprints, letters, contracts. The hotel would expand next year. There were sketches for new wings, plans for an artist-in-residence program, even a scholarship fund for hospitality students from underrepresented backgrounds. Legacy, I thought, but not the kind my father meant. He'd built balance sheets. I was building belonging. I smiled at the thought. Then, without fully deciding to, I opened my laptop and began to write not a business plan, not an email, but a letter to my father, to my dad. You once told me that numbers never lie, but people do. I used to believe that meant love should be measurable in achievements, in degrees, in money. But love doesn't live on a ledger. It lives in the invisible things you build when no one is watching. The hotels, the homes, the people who find comfort. Because of what you've made, that's my math now. You wanted me to follow the safe road. I couldn't. I followed the one that hurt, the one that led me here. And though I wish you could have seen me without needing proof, I still thank you for the voice you gave me, the one that said, do better. Be more. I just learned to say it differently. Ava, I didn't know if I'd ever send it. Maybe it wasn't for him. Maybe it was for me. Outside, the rain had turned into mist. The city glowed beneath it, the skyline soft like a promise. I stood there feeling the weight of the years settle and lift all at once. Success had always been the weapon I forged out of pain, but tonight, it didn't feel like a weapon anymore. It felt like a story finally told to completion. I thought back to that night years ago, the one when I'd slept on the floor of my first failing property, rain dripping through the ceiling, the air smelling of mildew and fear. I'd promised myself then, one day they'll know who you are. Now they did, and somehow it mattered less than I thought it would. Because what I really wanted wasn't recognition. It was relief. The relief of knowing I didn't have to chase the table anymore. I'd built my own. I set the wine glass down and opened the balcony door. Cool air swept through the room, smelling faintly of wet stone and jasmine. Somewhere below, a siren wailed, fading into the hum of traffic, the symphony of a city that never stops dreaming, even when it's drenched. I leaned on the railing, eyes tracing the horizon where dawn was beginning to ghost the sky. The city would wake soon. So would I. For now, there was just the quiet and the heartbeat of a life finally lived on my own terms. And in that silence, in the echo of everything I'd lost and built again, I whispered to no one in particular, "This is mine." Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched something in you, if you've ever been told you don't belong, or that your dreams were too big for the room you were given, remember this: you can build your own room. You can build your own table. And when you do, don't forget to leave the door open for the ones still learning how to stand. Like, share, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what did you build when no one believed in you? End.